How we doing, folks? Dave Brown here with the New Populist. Thank you again for joining me. By now, I'm sure you've seen that clip of Donald Trump in the White House with the president from South Africa, where he, as the news media calls it, ambushed him with those videos of South African politicians calling for the death of white people in South Africa. And the president of South Africa, as you can imagine, didn't know how to respond. He was not expecting that. He was caught with his pants down, and he really didn't have a good response for what he saw. And what can you say? The video speaks for itself. Now, one thing that is sort of annoying me is the use of semantics in politics, and specifically when it comes to the term genocide, because we've heard people say that what's happening in South Africa is genocide. And the response to that from people who say it's not happening is that, well, whites are being killed, but so are blacks. It's more of just a violence problem. No one is being targeted specifically. And what I say is that it doesn't matter what label you give it. Clearly, there is some anger against white people in Africa by African leaders, and they have been targeted. Have black people died too? Yes, but white farmers in particular have been targeted because they are white. And to me, whether or not it fits the definition of genocide is really pointless. It doesn't really mean anything. Another example, Gaza. You hear people say that it is genocide in Gaza, and the people saying there is no genocide in Gaza say, well, the population in Gaza is 1.8 million right now. After 2 years of war, the population hasn't changed that much. If it were genocide, a lot more people would have been killed. And I guess they're right, it's not technically genocide, but to me, again, that is besides the point. The point is that there have been tens of thousands of innocent people killed in this war, and in my opinion, it is 100% wrong, and how the IDF is executing this war is 100% wrong. So, whether or not it's genocide by definition, again, is pointless. And if you play this game with definitions, you have some people who will claim that what happened in Germany in the 1930s to a certain group of people wasn't genocide. And they'll say, well, when the Allies showed up, they were alive in camps. If it were genocide, they would have all been killed. Does that really matter? What we know for a fact is that that regime was against the Jewish people, and they systematically did kill millions of Jews. Whether or not they killed all of them in Germany is irrelevant. And again, the actual definition of genocide is being manipulated by people who want to claim that what happened there wasn't as bad as people make it out to be. So let's not get hung up on these definitions, because it just allows people to make excuses for what's going on there. And another issue that's related is, we talk about killing people, mass killing, whether it's war or otherwise, and the question becomes, what when is killing, quote unquote, acceptable? Because we hear, for example, in Gaza, that the killing of innocent people is acceptable because Hamas is using them as human shields. Is that true? Well, who decides that? Well, the people in power decide when it's okay to kill somebody. And we see this in every conflict. We can go back to World War II, the United States dropping bombs on the atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We, in an instant, vaporized tens of thousands of people who were not soldiers, men, women, children, elderly, right in an instant. Was that okay? Well, apparently, it was. We argue in the West that that was 100% okay, and not only that, if you question dropping the atomic weapon, the atomic bomb on these two cities, you're a bad person. How dare you challenge that? Tucker Carlson, he challenged it, and he was attacked by people for saying that it was wrong to do. So, was it wrong? Well, if you're the government with power, you can say, no, it's fine. But ultimately, putting that aside, just being a human being, clearly vaporizing 100,000 civilians with the bomb, sorry, it doesn't cut it. That was 100% wrong. And I would argue the same thing in Gaza. You have, say, one suspected Hamas person in an area where people were told to go to get away from the violence. And then the IDF will go, well, that we think there's a bad guy there. He's in an area where there's a bunch of women and children. You know what? We want to get him, so drop the bomb. And then they kill 80 people. And they justify it by saying, well, there was a bad guy there and it's collateral damage. And in my opinion, that doesn't cut it. Just because you made an attempt to kill a bad guy doesn't mean that killing all these innocent people is okay. Again, what makes it right, quote unquote, is having power. When you have power, when you're the IDF and Israel backed by the United States, then you have the power to make these statements because no one can stop you. And why does anybody do anything? Because they can. And that is why. And one last thing, talking about these South African farmers, these whites that came to the United States. And I'm always interested in consistency in arguments as far as applying the same standard to everybody. And what do I mean? Well, you hear people say that they should go back to the Netherlands. They're Dutch descent. Go back to the Netherlands. Or your German descent. Go back to Germany. You don't actually belong here. Now, they've been there for over 300 years. And my question is, at what point do you become native? Because if I were to say that if you're black, you can't truly be an Englishman. If you're from India, you can't truly be an Englishman. I would be called racist immediately. No questions. You're a racist. How dare you say that? An Englishman can be of any ethnicity. Well, I guess that doesn't really apply to whites in South Africa because they're supposed to go home back to Europe, even though they've been there for 300 years. So again, I want to see consistency. If black people can go to other lands outside of Africa and become part of that country or part of those lands and be native there, then that should also apply to white people in places outside of Europe. One standard for everybody. And not to pick on Israel, but I think there's another interesting discussion to be had about, again, when are you native to a land and how long can you claim rights to a land? And part of what makes this situation in Israel so difficult is that the premise for having Israel created is, in my opinion, a little shaky, and that's why this violence is ongoing, because you have, for example, European Jews who lived in Europe for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Genetically, European Jews are 50 to 70% European. They do have some amount of Middle Eastern blood. But if you're majority European ethnically and you've lived in Europe for over 1,000 years, at what point do you just become European? And at what point do you lose the right to claim land that your ancestors lived at, some of your ancestors lived at 2,000 years ago? Because personally, the idea that myself, having some European Jewish ancestry, has the right to go to modern day Israel and claim I belong there seems to me to be ridiculous. And it's not just European Jews, it's everybody. If you look at humanity, we're always moving around. We're always going different places. And do other people have right to claim land somewhere else because they had ancestors there? Let's use the example of England. England had the native Britons. They had the Normans coming from France. They had the Saxons coming from continental Europe. And then they have the Norsemen coming from Norway. And they all, came down to England and at different times, mixed in with the population there. And over time, the people there were just part of England, English. Now, if you're partially of descent from Norway as an Englishman, do you have rights to go and claim land in Norway? Or if you have Norman ancestors, can you go to France and demand that you be given a chateau somewhere in France? Or are you just English and that's your country? So the fundamental problem with Zionism is the idea that this one group, not others, can, based off of having some ancestry from a place on the other side of the world, can go back there and claim that land. And if people are there, well, too bad for them, they have to move. And that is fundamentally why, again, why this issue with Israel is ongoing and it's hard to solve, because the idea of the founding of Israel in that spot doesn't honestly make too much sense. And the Arabs in the area go, hey, this is ridiculous. We've been living here. If you're Palestinian, and now we're being forced to the West Bank or Gaza, and it was done through violence and intimidation. We're gonna fight, and that's been happening for the last 80 years, and why I think it's almost impossible for this thing to ever be settled, because the foundations were kind of ridiculous. Now, that being said, once a country exists, the country exists. It's not going anywhere, Israel, and nor should it. The question is, how does Israel survive and live in a situation where they created a country, the Jewish people inside of it, where other people lived, that has created this conflict? And until that root issue is addressed honestly by people, this conflict will never be solved. And of course, some people will say that the way it's solved is you have a Palestinian state. But of course, the Israelis, especially the Likud party, say, no, there should not be a Palestinian state. It should all be under the control of the Israeli government. So here we are, fighting all these years, and it looks like the fighting will never end. Again, what is genocide? Semantics, it's really irrelevant. And whatever laws we have need to apply equally to everyone, or else we're always going to be fighting. Well, that is it for now. I'm sure some people might disagree with some of the things I said today, but if we truly support free speech and having open dialogue, well, we should be able to have these discussions and ask those questions that are a little more controversial. And I'm, of course, open to different opinions, and I'm more than happy to hear them. So if you have anything to say in the comments, go ahead and leave something there and speak your mind. That's what we all should be doing. Well, that's it for now. If you're new to my channel, like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.